podcast in which one man strives to level up his geekhood and helping you do the same, one battle at a time. Now, let's get geeky with Gamer Leaf.
You and your adventuring party trudge back into town to offload the spoils of your latest dungeon delve, expecting nothing more than the usual few moments of haggling with a local shopkeeper before either the cranky old wizard or the gruff but friendly barkeep offer you another quest. But this time, something is different. Gone are the all-too-predictable villagers, the cranky wizard, the gruff barkeep, and the hooded ranger who always sits in the one perpetually dark corner of the tavern. Gone is the conveniently timed market fair with the cheap travel rations but 20% chance that you'll be pickpocketed while shopping. Gone is the eerie uniformity of the members of the town guard. Instead, wandering priests of a religion you've never heard of are holding ceremonies in the market grounds. Half the town guard seem to have taken to wearing their holy symbols, and the other half eye their converted brethren with suspicion. Tension runs high as you enter the tavern. Inside, your nose is assaulted by the pungent smell of burning sage, and a group of young men and women dressed in embroidered silks flock around a fortune-teller reading tea leaves by the fire, which sometimes emits chimes like the language of the Celestials. Across the barroom, in the formerly dark corner, a bard sits tuning her bone-worked violin, smiling cheerily despite what looks like a fresh brand burned into her cheek. It looks like things just got a whole lot more interesting.
Sound familiar to me? To you? To me either. But we have a special interview episode for you, as we have too many interviews. Check it out.
Let's see, that's a story of the GameMaster's Apprentice, a fantasy deck for an RPG, and today we have the pleasure of the creator or mastermind and creator of it, Nathan Rockwood. Is that correct? You're the mastermind and creator of the...
Yep, this is something I've been working on for quite a while.
Oh, cool. So you have a new game. Well, I guess it's not necessarily a game. It's more like a randomized deck for people playing role-playing games on Kickstarter. What can you tell us about it?
So the GameMaster's Apprentice decks started with me a little bit over a decade ago as a completely personal project. I played role-playing games regularly, and my group was great, but I had two major issues I wanted to address. One, I could never come up with good names for non-player characters, and two, I was always the GM, and I never got to play myself. The cards kind of started out with just random names on them and a more basic game engine than they have now, and I started playing solo RPGs and asking the deck leading questions as if it were, a completely inexperienced game master. And over the years it evolved, and I kept adding and changing bits and pieces to them. And then in 2014, a friend of mine introduced me to Max Johnson, the artist and graphic designer, who worked with me to create the current versions of the decks.
Cool. And just bear with us, because I don't know about my listeners, but we're just barely rolling out with role-playing games. I know I played them like 20-plus years ago, and me and my family are going to start getting into them, so bear with us. When you say NPC, I believe that's a non-player character or something?
Mm-hmm. So non-player character, just a sort of like the shopkeeper in the village or the wandering town guard that you run into on the street. And a role-playing game, since it can involve a large group of players telling a story together, has a huge number of possible side characters and quest givers and bad guys and good guys and friends and foes. And so because when we're running these games, we have to keep moving quickly and coming up with new characters and new names if you don't have them all planned out ahead of time. I really enjoy creating stories like that, but I have trouble coming up with a new name for a character every 5 minutes. And so I basically put together a list of several hundred of them and put them onto these decks of cards, and that sort of kicked off this whole adventure that turned into making a deck of cards that can generate an entire story and even arbitrate it, like run the rules of the game and tell you what happens when you attack that goblin or haggle with that merchant.
Interesting. So like I said, we're kind of I'm getting back into it. My family's going to start role-playing with me, and we're going to bring the audience of Gamer Leaf along for the ride, hopefully. And so, lost my train of thought. Okay, so yeah, with this being new to us, we wanted to... So when I thought people do the role-playing game, So the dice master, the dungeon master, or game master, they don't write out the whole story typically. It's been 20 years since I did it. They don't write out the story. They just the character as they come to them, or.
It depends on the person. A lot of game masters write down at least a few notes ahead of time, and I'm sort of in that category. Some people like to use pre-published adventures that have most things that you could need written out ahead of time by some professional group. But other people run it entirely off the cuff and just make it up as they go. And I made these cards to work pretty well for anyone in any of those roles, because you could use them ahead of time to plan out a game. You could use them in the moment to answer a quick question if suddenly you need to know what a character's name is, what somebody is carrying, what their favorite, what their favorite vice is, or what their highest virtue is, things like that. So you could ask those questions on the go if you need to.
Cool beans. And so, yeah, it's been kind of scary and overwhelming for me to get into this and trying to just even create a character. Would this work for somebody like me, just somebody who's starting role-playing games? Can you create your character that way too, or is it just for non-player characters?
Oh, you could definitely use it for a player character as well. I use them myself in a number of ways when I'm playing in a game and not just the game master. So often especially when I'm playing a solo game, but even if I'm playing with a group, when I'm making a character, even if I've got a good idea already, I want to play, say, an elven bard or a dwarf warrior, I will still draw a couple of cards, and then I'm not using them to tell me everything about my character, but I look at them and I think, oh, maybe this card mentions somebody having eyes like a cat. Well, maybe that's a weird trait my character has. Or it mentions something like, oh, this person is carrying a lucky charm. So maybe I have something that's not a magic item. It's just a lucky charm from my childhood that I've always kept with me. And so I use it to give my characters a little bit more personality.
Okay, and I've been listening to the Glass Cannon podcast, which is kind of like a role-playing, they do a live playthrough of, what is it called? Not D&D, but the spin-off of D&D.
Pathfinder?
Yeah, Pathfinder. And they do that. And so I've been listening to that a little lately, and they create the characters. And I don't know if they use anything like this, but why the cards? Is there other ways that people can do that, or why do you choose cards to do it?
So there are absolutely other ways that people can seek inspiration for character creation or for game adventure design. But I like the cards because, for me, I like having everything all in one place. I love random tables, but the problem with using a large number of them is that you have to search through books to find them, or you have to scroll through PDFs. And that's just a little bit more cumbersome than I want to spend my time on when I'm running a game. And so the cards let me carry them around in the palm of my hand, and I can just check them quickly and put them down when I'm done.
Cool. And is it just for creating characters, or do you have adventures too, or could you do the whole game with the cards, do you think?
You absolutely can do an entire game with just the cards. I have on there random event generators, story seed generators, like catalysts and locations for encounters in a game. And I have some very flexible things that are based on using images. I call them tag symbols, but I have a set of images that are designed to give you a few ideas about what kinds of things might happen in the story, combat, danger of other kinds, emotional encounters, social encounters, and things like that. So you could, starting from a completely blank slate, run a game where you generate the entire story, you make all the characters, and then you decide what happens using the cards. And I have some videos on my Kickstarter page that explain those different things you can do.
Wow, that's perfect, because especially for me, I want to get into this role-playing game, and I'll read through the books or whatever, but it gets really overwhelming and daunting. That seems like a quick way to go. I imagine you've been playtesting and whatnot. Have people done that then, where you guys have played adventures based on these cards?
Definitely. I essentially, because I run a large gamers club for the high school where I teach English and video game design, I have between 5 and 10 students every week with not constant attendance, so I don't know who's going to be there every time. And I have to be ready to run a game for them, and I use the cards to help me keep things moving no matter what happens. If suddenly none of the players who are playing warriors showed up, having a lot of combat would probably get everybody killed. So we do something different, and I use the cards to come up with a new story on the fly. It's not always going to be the same kind of story that I would have created on my own if I was just going entirely with my whatever's in my head already. But that's why I like them, because if I just did the same thing every time, then it gets boring.
For sure, definitely. So tell me more about you said you run a game with the high school students. That's got to be interesting. How long have you been doing that?
So I've been teaching at the high school level for about 7 years now, and I've been running games for groups of high schoolers for 6. And I was running games when I was in high school, so I kind of am familiar with running games for people who haven't got a lot of experience role playing. But it's been a blast helping get more people introduced to the hobby, gaming in general, not just tabletop role playing, because we play other games too, but the idea that I can offer this space for young geeks to hang out and have fun is really cool.
Well, that's awesome. So do you do that as an after-school thing, or on the weekend, or during class, or how does that work?
Well, it's an after-school club, and I try to make sure that it doesn't interfere with their other obligations, but we spend some time every week on a variety of games, and it gives them a way to, connect with other people with the same interests.
Wow, that's awesome. So, say somebody listening is interested in doing that. How did you go about starting doing that?
Well, since I am a teacher at a local public school, it was easy for some of the kids who are interested to find me, because I'm not shy about being a tabletop role player and a geek in general. And so if you are living in an area with a community center, be it at a local library or a YMCA or a public school that offers programs where people can teach, I think it would be great for more gamers out there to, set up times and people can show up in a nice, easy to reach place like a public library and use one of their conference rooms to learn how to play cool games.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. I recently heard of my library. They had something set up where people could come and play Monopoly. I don't know if they do other things, but I think it was to teach finance or whatnot somehow. But yeah, I think that's a really novel idea. That's great. So why do you choose to go the Kickstarter route with this project?
So, like I said, I'm a teacher, and while I really enjoy teaching and I've always really enjoyed gaming, my gaming experience in the professional industry prior to my Kickstarter was as a freelancer. I started off in college writing freelance for Margaret Weis Productions on the Serenity role-playing game, and then the Battlestar Galactica role-playing game and the other Cortex Classic games that they produced. But until I ran the Kickstarter, I had never published anything that was entirely my own. And I didn't have any savings for starting a business, so I looked at my budget. I talked to an artist, Max Johnson, as I mentioned, and we put together a plan that would let me pay him when my Kickstarter funded. And if my Kickstarter did not fund, I could not sell the cards. So he was willing to work with me on spec, basically, saying that, okay, he thought my idea was cool enough that it would succeed, and we would hopefully both get what we wanted out of it. I would get my deck to be published, and he would get money for his hard work. And so that was what my Kickstarter was all about at first. And then the current Kickstarter that is for just one new deck, the fantasy deck, is basically the same thing, but this time we were able to narrow our costs a little bit because we've done it before. And so I'm again kickstarting just to get money to pay my artists back. And since it's already overfunded, I'm currently seeking more artists to do some bonus art for my backers, and I'm surely going to be looking at other things I can do to improve the cards, improve my products, and find ways to make sure the backers get what they want out of it.
Cool. So you say previous one. So this is like an expansion to a previous one you made, or what's the difference between this deck and the one you made previous that I hadn't?
The original GameMaster's Apprentice deck, the very first one, was designed to be both system neutral, you could use it with any game, but also genre neutral. So it wasn't just fantasy or science fiction. It has elements of both of those things and modern settings so that you can just grab it and go. And to be honest, I've used it for years before I did the Kickstarter, and I thought it was perfectly fine for anything. But when the Kickstarter that I ran in 2014 started to overfund, we hit our stretch goals that were specific genre decks like science fiction and steampunk and horror and a number of others. And I have to admit that having the special art for those that Max Johnson did and having the specialized rewritten text for them makes those games a lot more vivid. All the descriptions are much more appropriate to the genres. And so that's why we're doing this new one. It's another genre expansion. It's a deck of cards that's the same length and same basic idea as the original set, but now it's tweaked to be perfect for any kind of fantasy game. And obviously, Dungeons and Dragons is the most famous of those, but you could use it with any system or fantasy setting.
Cool, cool. And it sounds like you've played well, you were working with some previously. It sounds like you've played quite a few different role-playing games. What do you think's been the most interesting one?
That's a tough question because I have played a lot, but I think personally, I've got two that are sort of right at the top. The Advanced Dungeons and Dragons Second Edition Planescape setting. I have, as a designer, lots of things I could say that are both good and bad about old D&D rules. They have a special place in my heart because that's how I grew up. But Planescape was a fascinating setting, and it's currently available, I think, as PDFs from Drive Thru. So anybody who has never heard of Planescape, if you are interested in very philosophical fantasy, I recommend it highly. But for a modern game, I've been playing an awful lot of Numenera by Monty Cook Games and other games using the same system, the Cypher system, and I really love it because it's so quick to run.
Cool. And you talk of Drive Thru, and I saw that on your Kickstarter page. What exactly is Drive Thru?
So Drive Thru is, when I say Drive Thru, I'm using it as shorthand for Drive Thru RPG for the most part. But Drive Thru and the other sites associated with it are all part of the One Bookshelf family of websites. They basically sell gaming and other kinds of PDFs and do print-on-demand cards and comic books and game books and things like that. And so they're how I'm fulfilling my Kickstarter. They're, for me, doing exactly what I need, producing really high-quality cards and making it easy for me to get them out to the backers. And so I am extremely grateful that they have enabled small creators like me to get set up without a whole lot of overhead. I didn't have to order 1,000 decks in order to get started. So it's just a website that lets people find all of these games in one easy place.
Cool, that's awesome. And let's see here. So let's talk about a part of this deck that you're most proud of.
So this one might sound a bit weird because it's going to start off kind of technical, but it's the number 120, which is the number of actual card faces in the deck, because each deck is 60 cards, but I have a face on each side. There are no backs to the cards. You have to kind of shuffle them in your hands, and when you draw one, you just pick whichever side of it you want to use. And the reason
they're double-sided, that's cool.
Yeah, they're double-sided, which is great for a number of reasons. One is that 60 physical cards with 120 faces is a really good size to hold in your hand. It's the same size as most decks of Magic cards, and I used to play a lot of Magic the Gathering when I was younger. So it's easy to hold, but also it perfectly fits all of the things that I wanted to put on it. So I have a full set of, say, gaming dice on there, 20-sided, 12-sided, 6-sided, 10-sided, etc. And 120 is a number that you can get as many of those dice to divide evenly into as possible without having any extra numbers and having it not have true randomization, with the only exception being the 8-sided die. And then for several other things on there, there's just a nearly miraculous number of coincidences, like, for example, the Norse runes, which are also called Elder Futhark. I have on there, and there's 24 of them, and 24 happens to divide evenly into 120. And so I just kept finding that 120 was the perfect number of cards to have. So I have so many different systems on here because this is the exact right number to make it all work.
Cool. And yeah, if you had 120 cards instead of just 60, that would be a lot bigger and harder to shuffle, wouldn't it, or whatnot?
Yeah, if I had 120 physical cards, I would just drop them all over the place.
Yeah.
I did try printing some like that originally, and it just didn't work out well. So I've been doing it this way, and I really enjoy it. I know that it's not everybody's thing, though, which is why whenever you buy the physical cards, you also get the PDF, and you can print it out yourself. And then if you want to, you can sleeve them or print them on cardstock and have 120 separate cards, and that works for you. That's great.
Cool beans. And let's talk about, you talked of playtest and whatnot. Has there been, during this playtesting of this one, has there been anything that just wouldn't work regardless and you had to scrap it totally?
There was a number of stages, different things I had to take out. One of the things that I took out for the first round was the ship and tavern name generator. It was too specific. I really liked it because you could get funny names for local taverns, and it was essentially just an adjective and a noun. So it would be something like the Lucky Mermaid or something like that. And it could work for spaceships or sailing ships equally well. But because I wanted more space in the cards to put on virtues and vices for characters to have, I had to take that off.
Oh, wow, yeah, so you come with the 120. And you talked a minute ago about dice. Are there dice included, like randomized dice within the cards?
Yeah, so one of the parts of the cards is what I call the dice wheel, and it's on the top of each card, and it's just a circle of different sided dice with the whole set of gaming dice, D4 through percentile dice. And they aren't necessary. I mean, if you've got a handful of real dice, you can use those instead. But I like to use the cards when I'm traveling in a commute on a train and in situations like that. So I don't have a way to roll dice. And while, of course, not everybody needs that, it's also just an easy way to draw a quick random number without my players knowing if I'm rolling any dice. I can just look at a card and get the results of a NPC thief's sneak check to see if they sneak up on the party, for example.
Cool, yeah, that's awesome. And I'm told I suffer from analysis paralysis, or AP. It seems like this would be perfect for me when I'm able to DM for our family, having to come up with everything by myself. This way I don't have to necessarily make all the choices. Was that the inspiration behind it? If not, what was?
That's a large part of it. Analysis paralysis is something that slows me down in the moment when I'm trying to decide what would work best. And so having these cards, even if I don't always treat them as if when I draw a card, I have to be locked into what I see on that card. If I just draw one for some inspiration, there are things on them like sensory snippets. So I could draw one and see something like a cold nose against your skin. And suddenly I have in my head the idea of a cute dog has run up to the party, something like that. And so I don't know exactly where it's going to go yet, but I draw the cards and I get quick flashes of inspiration.
Cool beans. So when you're drawing, I watched the video and looked at it a little bit. You draw like one card and then it gives you something about the character, and then you draw another one, or how does that usually go?
So you could draw one card and look at things on it and construct an entire character out of just the one card, but then you'd only have 120 different random sets of data. So what I do is I like to draw 3 cards for almost anything I'm doing. And because for the most part, not for all of them, but for most of the fields in the card, it's completely unique information on each card. If I draw 3 cards, that's 1.7 million possible combinations.
Oh, wow, that's great. Let's see. So it sounds like you're big into English and math, or...
I'm not actually that good at math, but I definitely really appreciated a friend of mine helping me with the math on these cards.
Oh, cool. Yeah, that's awesome. And let's see here. So was that the inspiration behind it then, analysis paralysis, or was there something else that led this?
So that was part of it. The rest of it was just the desire to be able to actually play in a game instead of being the DM or dungeon master. I had a big group in college, and I was almost always the dungeon master for it. And while that was fun, I started to sort of feel a little bit like I wanted to try playing my own characters. And so having the cards as a solo game engine to sort of treat them like a dungeon master and ask them questions and have them tell me what happens made it possible to run myself through a variety of adventures very quickly. And so that was also a goal of mine from the beginning.
Cool. Yeah, you talked about solo gameplay. So like if I wanted to role play myself, I could do that
Hmm.
with these.
You could just take a character like that you made up for a normal role playing game, and you could say, "All right, I'm starting off in a town square. What happens next?" And you draw a card and get an adventure started right there.
Cool. That's so awesome. I really like that idea. And how did you get into role playing games, Nathan?
When I was in elementary school, my siblings and I found my parents' old red and blue D&D box sets, which are sort of the classic old D&D pre AD&D second edition, etc. And it didn't have a whole lot in it. It was only 3 levels of characters and only a few kinds of things to do. But we found it fascinating. And then in 6th grade, a buddy of mine wrote his own 60-page rule book for his own entirely new role-playing game because he'd gotten bored with what we had, and we didn't have any money to buy any more rule books for Dungeons and Dragons. And then from there, we just started playing that game. And then in high school, I started playing more normal role-playing games with people I met in high school. And it was just all a big spiral from there. We just kept adding more people to our group, learning new games, and it sort of just never stopped from there.
So you didn't go on a hiatus? Like I've been on a 20-year hiatus, and I've heard of other people going on a hiatus from it.
Well, since it's such a niche hobby, that's pretty common. I've definitely had times when I wasn't playing regularly, like playing every month or every week, but I don't think there's been a year that I didn't play some kind of role-playing game. So especially since I got the cards as a solo game engine, I've pretty much kept up the hobby since I was a small child.
Oh wow, that's awesome! And you talked of a couple of different games. Are those currently your favorite ones right now? The 2 that you brought up previously.
Yeah, I think I mentioned some of my current favorites. And again, just I love the old D&D Planescape setting, but recently I've been playing a lot of the Cypher System by Monty Cook Games because for me it works very quickly. I really appreciate the narrative style of it, and also I'm able to use my cards with it pretty well because the game system relies on a 10-point difficulty scale and some very narrative character structures that fit my cards perfectly.
Cool, awesome, that's great. And minus coming to your hometown and stalking you that way, how would somebody go about finding you online or whatnot?
So in meat space, real space, I actually like to go to Gen Con when I can, though unfortunately I'm not going to be there this year. But digitally, my website is www.larcenistdesigns.com, and that's probably the best way to reach me. You can find my contact form there, and I am always happy to chat about gaming, about game design, and if you read my very few blog posts, I don't blog regularly enough, you'll see that I also write about video games as literature in English classes, and so I'd be happy to talk to anybody about that too.
Well, that's cool. And we'll make sure, just in case they don't have a pen and paper to write down or they're kind of slow on the uptake, we'll make sure we put that in the show notes as well as the Kickstarter. And just really quickly, why should somebody take a chance on this Kickstarter? I know it's already funded and whatnot, but why should somebody who's listening, if they're interested, why should they take a chance on this particular deck and whatnot?
So I like to make sure that what we're looking at Kickstarter is an attempt to get the basic funding I need for the cards. And since we've gone over that, what I'm doing now is I'm working on finding a way to keep rewarding the community for this overwhelming support. So we're currently working on a table of random magical effects that everybody who backs the Kickstarter will get to participate in. You'll get to suggest something, no matter how crazy, as long as it's the kind of thing that might happen in a fantasy game, like suddenly a vampire appears next to you and declares their undying love, or whatever else it is that occurs to you as a random magical effect. And then once we've collected those all together after the Kickstarter, I'm going to be hiring some artists, I've already started hiring them, to illustrate a few of them so that we can have them presented as nicely and professionally as possible, and we'll turn it into a table that will be distributed with the deck. So that's a unique opportunity that's only during the Kickstarter. And also, because all of the original Kickstarter decks are getting more improvements from this Kickstarter, I'm going to try and use the funds to upgrade them as well. They're all available as added rewards at the higher reward tiers. So this Kickstarter is probably the cheapest these decks will ever be again. Or at the very least, it's not really possible for them to be any cheaper than this, even if I someday offer a deep discount on them like this to about 50%. So
Well,
if you're interested, yeah.
Will people be able to buy them afterwards if they're not able to back it? It looks like it ends the 5th of September. Is that correct?
Yep, it ends, well, I guess it ends just before the 5th, midnight on the 4th. But yes, they will be available for sale on Drive Thru RPG and its family of websites, and they will be up there as long as Drive Thru exists. So I'm going to try to make sure that this isn't some kind of temporary exclusive. It's all going to be available to everyone.
Cool, and you heard that here first. So if you're driving, make sure you pull off to the side of the road. We don't want to have a bunch of accidents or you won't ever get to play this. But we'll put this in our show notes, and you can go ahead and go show Nathan your support and back the game, back it, and get the deck. I know you don't want to overpromise and underdeliver, but when they do back you and whatnot, when do you anticipate them getting the deck?
So because I have already begun doing my final content pass on it, and I've got beta decks already printed, I know that the art works, and I know that the way it looks when it comes out of Drive Thru's print-on-demand shop is good. I actually anticipate being able to get the decks out to people hopefully in October, but I've actually got the deadline set as December just in case it takes me some extra time.
Cool. And you say print on demand. That's something that RPG, they print it and send it to you, or is that something I'd have to go on my computer and print it off myself?
Yeah, print on demand is the pre-printed version where Drive Thru RPG will print out actually a very professional. I was worried that it wouldn't be the first time, but these are really well done decks, and they're beautiful, and they send them to you in the mail. You can order them with a deck box or without, depending on whether or not you want a plastic box to keep the cards in. And if you order that, you also get a copy of the electronic PDF so that you can either print it out yourself if you ever decide to, or you can at least just look at it ahead of time and start getting to figure out how to use the cards before your copy arrives in the mail.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Nathan. And now the next segment on our podcast is called the Adventures in Application Acquisition, in which we pick an app, whether it be an Android, iOS, phone, or tablet, or computer, or video game. It doesn't have to be related to role-playing game. It can. A while back ago, I had somebody who picked one about travel. Is there an application you use, be it whatever system or whatever that you are currently using that you like?
So there is one game that I've been really enjoying, or that I really enjoyed a while ago, that I like to recommend to people. It's called Heroes Rise, and it's sort of a choose-your-own-adventure superhero origin story. It's a role-playing game, but it plays out as a text game. You read the game, you make important decisions, you have stats and character traits and personality traits that your character evolves over time. And it, for me, is the perfect combination of reading and role-playing, and I got so hooked on it that I've played a huge number of their games, and it's actually the kind of thing that someday I might want to try to write my own if I ever get the time for it. So Heroes Rise, I strongly recommend it, from Choice of Games, who publish a number of other games like that too.
Well, that's awesome. And where can we find that? Is that a phone app or a tablet app? And is it iOS or Android? Do you know if it's specific?
It's actually pretty much all of the above. I don't think there's a separate tablet version, but you can get it on iOS or Android. You can get it on Steam, and you can play it directly on their website, choiceofgames.com. So it's available in a wide number of places.
Cool. And was it something that costs, or is it free?
I think it's paid. I don't know how much it costs anymore because I had it for a long time, but it's probably about $3 or $4.
Okay, and we'll leave the link for that in our show notes as well. If there was one thing that you could do if you own the rights to it, Nathan, what would you do to make that a better application, do you think?
That game that I just talked about?
Yes, sir.
I would I would make another sequel to it because I loved it so much. I'm still replaying parts of it occasionally. But also, I guess I just would say that any text adventure role playing game can always benefit from more deep choices that, when you make them, actually have impacts much later on in the story and to your character as time goes on. That's always good.
Cool, awesome. And yeah, we really enjoy having you on, Nathan. And we'll go. Yeah, so remember, if you're driving or if you whatever you're doing, make sure you pull off to the side of the road and go ahead and back this over there on the Kickstarter. Once again, it's called the GameMaster's Apprentice, a fantasy deck building RPG, and we'll make sure we leave all this in the show notes for you. And yeah, once again, thank you, Nathan. We appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me on.
So today we're going to be doing an RPG game.
Well, we just told you about an RPG game, but now on to Kickstarter Corner.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about...
Just tell us about the game.
Lewt Ninja.
Do you remember that's the game we got and did the...
Yeah, we did an opening on it. You can go check it out on Getting Geeky with Game Relief on YouTube.
Under Game Relief. So yeah, that's on, and we did the opening of it. Hopefully we do a gameplay. But what is so great about this project is, tell them what's so great about, other than playing a card game, what is so awesome about this?
One of 20 copies of this great game.
Yeah, you can win that over at
Geeks.com.
The giveawaygeek.com.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us what's so good about this game besides having fun with your friends. Tell us about it.
More than just a card game, it is to help
Disabled veterans
in their physical therapy anywhere, anytime. Listen to hear Cam talk all about the great project, whoever Cam is.
And yeah, you can listen to our episode that we released on Friday to hear all Cam talk about it. We wanted to give a great shout out and a congratulatory to Robert. A while back ago, we had him on Kickstarter Corner and on our episode. And Cauldron, Bubble, and Boil board game actually funded. Right, it came down to the wire, but it funded. And then we have some other games that we're talking about.
Shef, the tabletop game, card game of food, frame, and fun. Cancel funding. Follow them to see where they relaunched.
Yeah, so they canceled funding, but follow them. Make sure you follow them to see if they relaunch. And then you also want to check out.
One of the Acrchmage.
And that's going to be relaunching when? The 12th of
September.
And yeah, check out and join their Facebook event for updates and whatnot. And we'll make sure we leave a link in the notes. And then another game that we want you to remember about is Rise
of the Exiled.
Rise of the Exiled. And let's see here. For some reason,
a card game where you throw cards.
Yeah, it's a card game where you throw cards. And for some reason, my link on if any of the links on my episodes are not working, you can make sure you go ahead and check them out. Go ahead and give us a shout out, kind of using the new system. And for some reason, it didn't work. But we're going to go ahead and fix that for you. So if you ever have a problem with the link on the website not working, make sure, or on the show notes, make sure you do me a favor and go ahead and send us an email over at GameRelief@GameRelief.com. No, GameRelief@GameReliefGo.com. Kind of like Pokemon Go. But
Gamer Go.
Game Relief Go. So let's see here. Let's see. So yeah, you want to definitely check out Rise of the Exile, which is a card throwing game. They have 4 days to go, so they're almost done. But it looks like they might be relaunching as well, just like a lot of these games are relaunching. So make sure you check them out because they are going to be relaunching. I'm not sure when, but yeah, you'll want to check that out. And then don't forget to look for it coming onto Kickstarter. It might actually be there today when you listen to this episode, but it's called Potato Pirates, Coding Without Computers. And then, do you remember Hank's game? What's that called?
Magic of Legends, less than 5 days remain.
Yep, actually, there's not very many days, if at all. You might still be lucky for it to be going when you go ahead and listen to this. It might be over, though, by the time we get around to releasing this on Monday. I'm not sure exactly when it ends. We will let you know. Let's see here. Yeah, actually, this has 3 days to go at the time of this recording. So, yeah, depending on when you listen to this, it might be done. It looks like on Wednesday the 30th of August it's going to be done. So, you might still have time to be able to listen. Yeah, you still have time to back. Hopefully they'll reach funding, but I'm not sure at this point, unfortunately. Also, make sure you go ahead and check out Ancient Artifacts, which is a great nostalgia if you liked anything Indiana Jones. I know I did. It's been a while. I know you can go ahead and watch those over on the Amazon Prime for free, so I think I'm going to go watch them so I can get reacquainted, and then we'll go ahead and play Ancient Artifacts if you back that game. We have an interview coming up for that pretty soon here, so look out for that. Also, another game I found this week is called Ogre Cheerleaders, so make sure you check that out too. Build your own team of not just cheerleaders, not just ogres, but ogre cheerleaders. Look for some great things from them. They've created several games. This is number 3 from Paw Warrior Games. So make sure you go ahead and check that out as well. And then, just like we usually do, but this time instead we wanted to change it up. We wanted to give you an option to go ahead and let us know what you think about our Patreon page. Don't take our word for it or the 5 backers that we have on there, but go ahead and look at it and tell us what you'd like to see, what we're missing, and what we can do better. And once again, a quick shout out and thank you to our patrons, whatever you want to call them. Let's go ahead and tell you who they are. Well, we have Ronald Gagnon, we have Axel Mercedo, we have Ethan Ireland, Jennifer Longworth, and also everythingboardgames.com. We love you and we want you to tell us how we're doing. We love constructive criticism and we would love to hear what you think about our show. You can go ahead and leave us emails at gamerelief@gamereliefgo.com, kind of like PokemonGo.com. Plus, you can also leave reviews. Someone left a review. They said to please ignore it because they hadn't heard our show. And we know that people are downloading the show. So if you are one of those people that is lucky enough to be listening, please make sure you subscribe on iTunes and rate and review the show, even if you don't listen there. Reviews really help out. In fact, it helped out so much a while back ago that we were number 9 over on the UK boards. We beat out both the Dice Tower podcast as well as Critical Hit and even Rotto for a day at least. We'll take our 15 minutes of fame, but why not give us some more and go ahead and tell people how great you think this podcast is. Even if you just give us a 5-star instead of a 10 or a 1, give us a 5. We're easygoing. And if you don't have iTunes, I imagine you know someone with an iPhone or an iPad. When they're not looking, go ahead and give us a quick review for them. They'll be happy and thank you, because one day they'll hear Getting Geeky with Game Relief, and they won't have to leave their own review. That is all now. Go ahead and get geeky with Game Relief. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you come back next time.
Gamer Leaf levels up. Tune in next week to see if Gamer Leaf's luck holds up.